I'm unmuted.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to do a quick introduction. And for those of you who don't know, Mrs. Rivky Slonim is my mother-in-law, Chani's mother, who has been on for already 2 different presentations here, and she's back by popular demand. And today she's going to be discussing, I call it Yiddish'isms, but she has it titled as words. The title over here, but it's basically it's going to be a Yiddish discussion, words to live by, or words that she or expressions from her grandparents. And so I'm going to pass the buck and give my mother-in-law the floor. So thank you again for joining us today, and thank you as well for taking your time. Thank you.
All
All
right.
right.
We're getting an echo, lady. Is there anything that can be done about that? I
All right.
heard it when you were speaking.
Hopefully it's off now.
Okay. Okay. You'll let me know if there's interference and if we need to do something. Good noon, everyone. Hi, Levi. Good to see you all. I'll tell you why I'm a recurring guest, because I like to hear him introduce me where he says, this is my mother-in-law, my wife, Chani's mother, and then I can ascertain that he only has one wife and that's still the case. Just checking, because we're at quite a distance from each other and you never know. You give your daughter away and, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to stroll down memory lane with you. So before I share with you the Yiddish aphorisms and the Yiddish quotations that I grew up with, I want to just give you some context and allow me to kind of paint for you a picture of my childhood, which begins with my mother getting married. And she had 2 brothers. She was her parents' only daughter. And when she got married, her father told her, I'm giving you a wedding present. I'm giving you a home. You will live on top of us. So my grandparents lived at 601 Lefferts Avenue in Crown Heights in Brooklyn, New York. And they lived on the first floor of a Brooklyn row house. And my parents lived on the 2nd floor. And as the family grew, we continued to live there. I'm the oldest. And we lived there until I was 16 years old. I'm telling you this so that you understand that I effectively grew up with my parents and my grandparents, all of whom co-parented me. And it was really idyllic. Talk about privilege. I have to own that I am extremely privileged growing up in that home with these role models and all that love embracing me and surrounding me. I don't think I ever went to sleep without kissing my grandparents and my parents, of course, without kissing my grandparents goodnight. I don't think I ever left to school one day without kissing my grandparents goodbye. And my grandmother would always whisper into my ear, Vergiss nicht, wer du bist, which means don't forget who you are. For years, I wondered who I was, that I shouldn't forget who I was. But I was a little bit of a troublemaker, or maybe a lot of bit of a troublemaker. And this was her way of saying, please behave. So I grew up in that very, very rich environment. And my grandparents, like I said, were an integral part of every single day. And what I want to share with you today, in the main, are expressions that I grew up with. And as I grew up, of course, hearing these all the time. And as I grew older, of course, I was able to understand them and appreciate them on a deeper level. And for those of you who speak Yiddish or whose parents spoke Yiddish, or maybe your grandparents spoke Yiddish, I'm hoping that some of this will kind of resonate with you. And then what I'd like to do is open up and hear if you have aphorisms or quotations that your parents or grandparents used all the time, that spoke volumes. There was so much wisdom. There was so much to learn. And also some of it was very subtle. It was almost like a wink and a nod. And when you heard somebody say certain things, you understood the whole story, or you understood that you had to wait for a different time to hear the rest of the story. So in no particular order, I'm just going to kind of throw them out, share them with you. Most of them are Yiddish, but some of them are German. My grandmother grew up in Vienna, and I believe that her first language was German. And she spoke with her sisters and brothers in German all the time. So we grew up hearing the German, and we grew up hearing her Sprichwörter. So that's German for aphorisms or quotations. And here they go. Basically, my grandmother's quotable quotes. I wrote them down so I don't forget. And I probably forgot some of them, but I'll give you as many as I can. So whenever we went on a trip, by the way, I'll never forget when I moved to Binghamton, New York. Oh, so I have to tell you that at that point, when I was 16, parents moved very, very, very far away from my grandparents. They moved across the alley. So a Brooklyn alley is wide enough, just wide enough to allow a car to go up the alley to the garage behind the houses. Really, like the car almost scrapes the walls. And the next door home became available, and my parents at that point already had a very large family, and we really were bursting at the seams. The homes in Crown Heights were very, very cheap in those days. What somebody bought for $30,000 is now selling for a cool $3 million, but I digress. So my parents bought the house next door. We children were so exercised that we were being forced to move so far away from my grandparents that we staged a sit-in that first night. And being the oldest, I was all of 16. I led the revolt, and I said we weren't moving. If my parents wanted to move so far away from my grandparents, if they felt that that was the right decision, that was up to them. But for us, this was not the right decision. And although my grandmother was so upset that we were moving so far, she said she didn't know how she was going to sleep without the pitter patter of our footsteps above her. And this way she knew who went to the bathroom, when they went to the bathroom, if everybody was okay. If there were too many people moving around at night, she knew something was awry. She said she didn't know how she was going to exist without this. But I have to say that when we staged our little rebellion, our sit-in, and we refused to move, she refused to play with us. We thought she was going to provide us with food, with dinner, with drinks, which she always did, of course, because her house was our house. We would run up and down, up and down. We never really even knew what floor we were on. But when she saw that we were doing something that was not what my parents wanted, she cut us off cold turkey. So of course the sit-in lasted for as long as we could stand it. But then we got hungry and thirsty. There were no pillows or blankets either. And my grandmother was not answering the door. For the only time in her life, she locked us out. So we had to move across the alleyway as well. Even after we moved, it was really like one house. And then she would scream all the time in the winter when we went out. If we weren't wearing a coat and we weren't wearing boots and we were going from our house to her house, she would say, "Naked and bovis," which literally means naked and barefoot. You cannot walk around naked and barefoot in the winter. Although, we weren't going to get dressed and put on boots and put on a winter coat to walk the hot 6 feet between our door and her door. Anyway, so the first Sprichwort, the first expression I wanted to share with you was something that she would always say when we left. If we went on a trip, she would always say, "Maluchim zon eich fin," which means angels should lead you. She always said this, and that's what got me remembering what happened when we moved, because when my husband and I moved some years later to Binghamton, New York, I was the first grandchild to kind of fly the coop, fly from the nest. And I remember her walking down the alleyway as we were backing out, and she was crying and crying. And then she ran to the window and to my husband's side. She knocked on the window and she made him open the window. It wasn't automatic in those days. And she said, "Take care of my Rivka, please." She was crying. To her, Binghamton, New York, which was 4 hours away from Crown Heights, seemed like an eternity. After that, some of my siblings and other grandchildren would proceed to move a lot further. So whenever we came and then we were saying goodbye, we were going on a trip, she would always say, "Maluchim zon eich fin." My grandmother was a very modest woman. She never liked to ask for favor. She didn't expect much. And she showed extreme appreciation for little things, for anything you did for her. If somebody were to change a light bulb for her, she would always say, "Soll dir sein lichtig dein ganzen Leben," which means it should be illuminated for you for your whole life. So that would be the words that came tumbling out of her mouth. If you changed a bulb for her, sollte sein lichtig für dein ganzes Leben. When someone took ill, she would always take it very seriously. It took me years and years and years to understand my grandmother's depth of love and empathy and pathos. And I remember her crying when she would hear that ill luck visited upon someone. I remember her exclaiming such great joy when she would hear about somebody else's simcha. And as a young child, I always wondered, like, why was she getting so excited? It wasn't even really our family. But that wasn't the way she was. She really felt everybody's pain and everybody's joy. She really, really, really personified empathy. And when somebody got sick, she would always say, "Von wann ist es gekommen, ahin soll es gehen." From where the sickness came, that's where it should go. Or a different variation on this, wie schnell es ist gekommen, also schnell soll es gehen. As fast as it came, so fast should it go away. Everybody should, we should all together experience this with the coronavirus. Wann ist es gekommen, dort soll es gehen, or wherever. It should go somewhere else. I don't care where it's warehouse, but away from us. So that was something she would say all the time. Very often when she would hear people talk about somebody else and maybe how they got like a very high position or some extreme good luck, very sudden, came upon them. And she felt that maybe there was some jealousy or some coveting, and somebody felt like, well, why should that happen to somebody? So she would always evoke the transience of everything in life. She would always try to teach us that, things can happen very, very quickly, but you don't know how long it's going to last. And she would offer this prayer, Rebbeinu shel Olam, that's Hebrew for creator of the world, Heb mir nicht auf, warf mir nicht herab, which means don't pick me up and don't throw me down. In other words, she was teaching us, don't be jealous of somebody else alighting to some great fame or getting this amazing position or falling upon a great fortune. She would say, keep it steady for me. Don't pick me up. Don't throw me down. When somebody expended a lot of energy on a project that she thought was just unnecessary, like if somebody spent 8 hours folding napkins for 8 people a certain way, like if somebody really put a lot of time and energy in something that she really didn't feel was that worthy of that amount of energy or time, she would say, "De mitzvahs or de beistein by a shissel kreplach," which means that this great merit should merit you a big bowl of kreplach. Now, kreplach are the Jewish wonton, I guess you could say. It's made of dough on the outside, and inside it's classically filled with, let's say, ground beef or something like that. And it's a traditional food to be eaten Erev Yom Kippur, before Yom Kippur. Also on Hoshana Rabbah, which is a little known holiday that's part of Sukkot. But the idea of eating kreplach is to say to God, I know I may not be so worthy, but please, when you judge me with kindness. So the meat is indicative of God's more harsh judgment, and the soft dough is indicative of God's kindness. So we eat it Erev Yom Kippur. We say to God, we're about to be judged. We're probably not as good as we should be. We're not as great, but you know what? Don't judge us with harsh judgment. Don't judge us the way you should. Cover it over with the mercy. Cover it over with the white dough. Anyway, ashissel kreplach, which means a big bowl of kreplach. Yeah, I mean, it's good. It's delicious if you like it, but it's like not worth that much. So my grandmother was saying, you're spending all this time folding these napkins, or God knows what you're doing. Okay, fine. You should merit a big shissel of kreplach, she would say. That was her way of saying, like, what you're doing is nonsensical. Over and over, my Bobby, that's what we called her, would teach us that there's a reason for everything. There is a reason for everything. And when somebody would raise an eyebrow about an incomprehensible situation, she would always say, and this is in German, she would always say, Jeder Warum hat a Darum, which means every why has a because. And that was code for, we'll talk about it later when the kids are not here. But you should just know that there's a reason. You know, so if somebody would say, what? They're moving out? They just moved in, let's say, to the house. She would say, she would wink, but even without a wink, we would understand. Jede Warum hat a Darum. Every why has a because. Sometimes she would say, Jetzt ist sie lichtig, which means now there's too much light in the room, which was code for there are too many children with their ears perked. So sie lichtig means too many kids around, too much light. We can't talk about this, but there's a good reason. When she wanted to wish somebody everything good, and I should just say that my grandmother, it sounds a little like boastful for me to say this, but this is the truth. She was really a very, very holy woman. She was a descendant of almost all the great luminaries in terms of all the Chassidic dynasties, because a lot of them kind of intermarried. So she ended up being an ancestress of many, many, many great people. And actually people would come to her to get blessings because her blessings had great efficacy. In fact, I'll tell you that one time a woman came to her because she had had a very, very difficult birth, and she came to her for a blessing that she was pregnant at the time, that her birth should be easy and everything should be healthy. And my grandmother wished her that everything should go 1, 2, 3. It should be very quick and it should go smoothly, 1, 2, 3. The woman almost had the baby in the house. So the next time she got pregnant, she came to my grandmother. She said, could you please say it should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That way we'll have time to call the ambulance and get to the hospital on time. So the reason I'm telling you this is because when she blessed somebody, she really blessed from the bottom of her heart. And one of her signature blessings would be, soll dir sein, wie ich wünsch dir, which means you should have what I wish for you. Like if you could only have everything that I wish for you, you'd be set for 100 lifetimes. So soll dir sein, wie ich wünsch dir. She would always teach us how powerful words are, and that we should really, really be careful with the spoken word. And it was really the opposite of, did you grow up with this ditty, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never harm me? Does that sound familiar? Well, I heard that at school all the time. But at home, my grandmother would teach us that a patch vergeht, aber a Wort besteht, which means a patch means when you get hit. When somebody hurts you, that will dissipate, but a word will stay with them forever. And of course, you know, now all these decades later, everybody understands how powerful words are, or at least we hope everybody understands. And we don't believe that words are without power. We understand how deeply they can either help or actually harm someone. But in those days, we used to think, you know, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never harm me. But she said, no, no, no. A patch vergeht, aber a Wort besteht. This next one is one of my favorites. Whenever she would hear a young child say something, especially was the kind of thing that made your, you arch your eyebrow, like you were kind of surprised, or you were like, where did this come from? She would always say, de große Kaien in de kleine Speien, which means what the big ones chew, the small ones will spit out. And I'll never forget that, because she made it so clear that, you know, nothing happens in a vacuum. And when you hear little kids talking a certain way, you can be assured they have heard that at home. So if you don't want your kids spying, if you don't want them spitting certain things out, be careful what you're putting out there in their ecosphere, because they're going to pick it up. Here's another very colorful aphorism, another one of my favorites. So my grandmother would always tell us that, you know, in life, you have to make choices. You have to always make like cost-benefit analysis. Probably you know the expression "Mekenish tanzen auf alle chasanas," which means you can't dance at all weddings. Just can't. You got to make choices. But what happens if you give up one thing for another thing? So you make that cost-benefit analysis and you make your choice, but then it turns out that the thing you choose wasn't that great or didn't end up happening or you couldn't go. So my grandmother would call that kind of situation, she would call that verfeulte Fisch in verstinkene Eier, which means verfeult means spoiled. Spoiled fish and stinky eggs. Like you gave up one thing for another, and now the other thing that you thought you'd have, you don't have either. Verfeulte Fisch, verstinkene Eier. Okay, when she would hear us planning things and we would get carried away, like we're going to have this big party, we're going to do this huge event, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to go somewhere, she would always bring us down to earth, you know, like kind of a reality check. She would say, "Wer soll kommt de Katz über de Wasser?" Which means, how's the cat going to go over the water? Like her expression was like, how are you going to make it work? How is it actually going to happen? What are the pragmatics? Think about this. Apparently, she didn't believe that cats could swim. Now, here's another absolute favorite. So one thing my grandmother could not stand was when people weren't nice to each other. And she had absolutely a zero tolerance policy for smugness, for hubris, for arrogance. She really couldn't stand that. And she especially couldn't stand when young people thought they knew better than older people. Like when they had it all figured out and they would talk about their parents, their grandparents, or older peers. So she would say, and this is also kind of a cross between Yiddish and German, she would say, "Wenn man hat Kinder in der Wiegen, darf man lassen lauten zufrieden," which means when you have children in the carriage, don't comment about other people. Meaning you didn't raise your kids yet. You still have kids in the carriage? So basically she would never use these words, but shut up and don't be such a big mouth and don't think that you're so brilliant and that you could comment on everybody's life and everybody's children's choices and what's right and what's wrong. You still have children in the carriage, so be humble. My grandmother was a great believer in reciprocity. She really believed that what you put out is what you got back in life. So she would always articulate this by saying, "Azad git morgen, azad git yor." The way you say good morning, that's how people will, that's what kind of salutation you'll get back. If you come into a room like a sourpuss and you don't care about anybody and you don't ask how they're doing, don't expect people to be so worried about you. This one's a good one. When she thought that people were doing things that were unnecessary, maybe taking unnecessary risks, or just putting them out there in a situation that she thought was ridiculous or not the brightest, she would say, "You're putting yourself in, you have a healthy head, you're putting yourself in a sick bed. Don't do it." Like, what do you need to get into that situation? Like if she felt that it wasn't a good idea to get into that business deal or to start, you know, a conversation with somebody who she thought it was not going to come to any good, she would just say, "Das da gesinnte Kopf, leg sich nicht da rein in a kranke Bett." You're healthy, don't put yourself in a sick bed. Not a good idea. When somebody started a project and my grandmother felt like they weren't going to carry through, you know how like there are people that get very excited, "I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this," but they never carry through on their projects. So about such a thing, she would say, "Es wird sich halten von Estateines bis Purim," which means their interest is going to be sustained from the day before Purim to Purim. The day before Purim is the fast of Esther. So she would say, from one day to the next, they're going to be interested. After that, Forget about it. It's not going to happen. When discussing matches for people, like somebody would say, oh, I wonder who she's ever going to marry. She's so X, Y, or Z, or he'll never find, the right girl. My grandmother would always say, jede Teppel hat sein Deckel, which means every pot has its cover. She would constantly reiterate that, every pot has its cover. Jede Teppel hat sein Deckel. Here's a German expression she would use regarding fiscal responsibility. She really had a knack for sizing up people's personality. She really did. Like, she could meet someone very, very quickly and figure out who they were. And she would always say in German, der was a penny nicht ehrt is a shilling nicht wert, which means one who can't appreciate a penny is not worth a shilling. If you see people who can't make responsible financial decisions, if they seem to just be throwing money out, don't trust them. Not a good person to invest in. Because my grandmother was such an integral part of our life, she had a ringside view on everything that went on. And we love each other to pieces, but we would fight a lot. And when we fought, she would never she would never do the classic, like, stop fighting, you're not allowed to fight. She would just repeat over and over, Kinderlach hat sich lieb, which means kids love each other. She would, that was her way of saying, just act like what you really feel deep down. My grandmother loved to dispense sincere compliments. She would always remind us that a compliment can be very valuable to the recipient while it's free to the one who takes the trouble to give it. So she would always say, a git wat kost nicht. It doesn't cost you anything to say something positive. Like when some of us would say to her, why are you being so effusive? Why are you running after that woman to tell her how beautiful she looks in that coat? Like, is that really necessary? She would always say, a git wat kost nicht. Like, it doesn't cost me anything, and it could mean so much to the other person. Okay, you're going to like this one. She had two variations on the same theme for how to get along with your in-law children, how you should be a good mother-in-law or a good grandmother-in-law. So she said as follows. A Schwieger is a Yiddish word for mother-in-law. A Schwieger darf haben a offene Beitel and a vermachte Mäuel. A mother-in-law has to have an open pocketbook and a closed mouth, period, exclamation point. But she had another variation. She would say, a Schwieger, a mother-in-law, darf schenken, schweigen, und schmeicheln. A mother-in-law should bestow presents, be silent, and smile. So it's a very similar thing, but the two things that are common in both is shut up and keep giving, and then you'll be a very good mother-in-law. Here's one that she never tired of saying, and of course, you know what they say, that as you grow older, your parents get smarter, right? So as I grow older, obviously, I'm able to understand, like I said, her deep, deep wisdom. She would also always say, Willst du wissen, wer du bist? Do you want to know who you really are? Kick mit wem de chava sich. See who your friends are. If you want to see who you really are, see who your friends are. Who are you drawn to? Who do you surround yourself with? Who likes to spend time with you? Because that's a reflection of who you really are. Concerning someone who suffered a turn of fortune and in a negative way, maybe lost a lot of money or got sick or something like that, she would always say, a gefallenem helft Gott. God always helps those who fall. In other words, it's I think connected to the idea that when you're humble, that's when you become kind of privy and merit God's overtures in a more manifest way. A gefallenem helft Gott. When you fall, when you're filled with yourself, you're not letting God in, as it were. But when you fall and you recognize that you need help, God will step in and help you. Okay, this one, I always think about this one. So everyone knows, they tell you all the time, if you have a lot of things to do, delegate, delegate, delegate. You have to let other people do things. You have to outsource things. So why do people have such a hard time letting go and letting people help them? Part of the reason is because you're not sure it's going to get done the way you want it done. And sometimes you ask someone to do something for you, and watching what they do and watching what the result is gives you such hypertension that you're like, who needs this? My grandmother had this sprichwort. She had this quotation. She would always say, mit jenim's Hand is git essen Luxchenkugel. Somebody else's hands, they should eat the noodle kugel. That should be their job. In other words, if you want something to get done, do it. You want it to get done right, do it yourself. Somebody's looking for a job, give them kugel to eat. Now, of course, obviously, you can't go through life like that. Especially when there's a lot of things to do, you have to learn how to delegate, and you have to learn what will work best and what will be able to be done by somebody else. And you also have to learn what you're going to be able to live with. But there are some things that you really know you just got to do yourself. And if somebody comes in the kitchen, they're like, can I help you? Yes, here's a piece of Luxchenkugel. Eat the Luxchenkugel. That will help me. When we would find fault in someone, you could see that a lot of this was said to us when we were not being so nice, or not really being up to the level of what my grandmother demanded in terms of being a kind, giving, sympathetic, sensitive person. So when she would hear us talking about someone, kind of maybe criticizing them, she would say, Alts in einem is nishtu bakenem. Everything in one person, there's nobody like that. In other words, you're picking on this person, you're criticizing them because of the X, Y, or Z. But just know, there's nobody that's perfect. Nobody. She would also remind us of this when we were dating. Like, there's nobody who's going to have every single possible characteristic. Alts in einem is nishtu bakenem. I also want to insert here an aphorism that I remember when I was young. I would go visit my friend Sarah Fagenson, and she was lucky enough to have her grandmother live with her for many years. And sometimes we would be talking and we would be laughing about somebody. Her grandmother would say, lacht, kinderlach, lacht. She would say, laugh, children, laugh. Me lacht van eich eichet. Somewhere else, somebody else is laughing about you. That would keep us humble. Lacht, kinderlach, lacht. Me lacht van eich eichet. You think that you're on top of the world and you're so smart and you're laughing about somebody else? Just know in somebody else's house, somebody's probably sitting and laughing. And she didn't do that in a mean way. It's just that these wonderfully wise women were just around to, remind us, just remind us what we had to know. Let's see. When we would wonder quizzically about a situation, and then somebody would figure out what happened, or let's say something went missing and somebody found it, or there was some kind of situation that was just like a mystery. And then when we figured out the reason for what had happened, she would say, aha, dorten liegt de Hint begraben, which means that's where the dog was buried. Now, I don't know what the back end story about that is, but there must have been a story. But dorten liegt de Hint begraben, that's where the dog is hidden. My grandmother, like many other people of her generation, lived through much hardship. She lived through 2 world wars. She watched her sister actually be burnt to death by the Nazis. She escaped herself from Europe, by the skin of her teeth. She was the matriarch of a large family. Invariably, there were difficulties that she watched. She lost a very young brother whom she had actually raised, and she lost another young brother. She went through a lot. And she would always remark with kind of wonder, she would say, a mensch is schwacher wie a Flieg and starker wie Eisen. That a person can be weaker than a fly and stronger than iron. This would be her way of like kind of exclaiming how amazing it is what people can go through in life. On the one hand, we're so vulnerable. You know, we're given to, we have frailties and we have foibles, and we're here today and gone tomorrow. With schwacher wie a Flieg, we could be even weaker than a fly. But on the other hand, starker wie Eisen, stronger than metal even. That was a way of kind of summing up what people are capable of. This one you're really gonna like. So what happens if you have to rebuke someone, but you know you can't do that because it'll start a fight, it won't be good. It's just not gonna end well. But you really wanna tell them. You wanna tell them that they're doing the wrong thing. But you don't wanna start a whole family war, family feud. Excuse me, 1 minute. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm teaching. So good to see you. So what do? So she said like this, "Men sucht de Tochter and men meint de Schnee." You tell your daughter, you criticize your daughter in the earshot of your daughter-in-law, because you can't tell your daughter-in-law, but you tell your daughter, and hopefully the daughter-in-law will understand. So sometimes the daughter will get rebuked for absolutely no reason. She didn't do anything wrong, but she's just going to have to take it. She's going to have to absorb it, because the girl's always going to go back to her mother and love her, but the daughter-in-law, not so much. You have to really be careful. So, mezuk de Tochter, meint de Schnee. But it doesn't just have to be a daughter and a daughter-in-law. It's an expression that means, you know, find the person that can take it. Find the person you could say it to, and then the person that has to hear it, you know, will hear it. So those are the ones that I remember from my grandmother. But I had a good friend here this weekend, and I told her I was going to do this, and she shared some that I thought were interesting also. She said that when they would stay up very, very late at night talking, and it was really like too late, her father would always say, "Setukt in Pinchif," which means it's day already, apparently in a city called Pinchif on a different time zone. So like he would be like, "Go to sleep. Geishen schlufen. Setukt in Pinchif. The sun is rising in Pinchif. You guys, you better go to sleep right now." She said another expression in their family was "Trick gate a koza." A koza apparently is Polish for a goat. So this is about a situation where you get yourself in, but you can't get out. Like trick gate a koza. Only a goat can walk backwards, but you got yourself enmeshed, you got yourself embroiled. You're just gonna have to go. You're gonna have to figure it out. Go to the other end. Only a goat goes backwards. Now, as you know, mature male goats have beards. So in their family, when someone gave an opinion, like they were a real expert, but you really didn't think they were an expert, like you were like, what do they know? So the expression was, "Euch a koze mit a bord," which means, oh, another goat with a beard. Like, oh, this person now thinks they're the world expert. They have an opinion. In our family, my grandmother would say the following: when somebody who was young or somebody who she didn't feel should be giving an opinion, or when somebody who you thought was much younger and all of a sudden they're achieving something that totally seems not to be where they are, she would say "Odem a mensch de katschke rikzach," which meant this person, look at them, the little chicken, they're moving. They're moving on. Like we thought they were so young. All of a sudden they bought a business and they're starting a whole industry. Odem a mensch de katschke rikzach. So those are some of the expressions I remember from my childhood, and I'm really curious and interested to hear from my friends. If you want to unmute yourself and tell us what you grew up with, words of wisdom, words to live by.
Hi, I'm
Hi.
Ellen, and my mother used to say when I would leave the house to go on the trip, something about go in health, return in health.
Geh Gesundheit and komm Gesundheit. Go in health and return in good health.
Kun, okay.
Geh Gesundheit,
That one I know.
Geh Gesundheit and komm Gesundheit.
Und bleibt gesund.
Okay.
Oh, I forgot, when we got new shoes, my grandmother would say, Zerreiß Gesundheit, which means tear them in good health.
Oh.
Yeah, that was it. You came home with spanking new shoes, tear them in good health. It's a great blessing.
And I had this, Janet here, and I had the great fortune of living with grandma and great-grandma. My great-grandma died,
wow.
yes, my great-grandma died when I was 9. So, and she spoke Yiddish all the time. So all the expressions that you are saying, I'm nodding my head and I'm saying, I can't repeat them because the tongue doesn't work that way anymore. But I understood, I'd say 80% of what you said.
Really happy. I
And,
could
and
see
they
that
always,
very
oh God, it was just amazing. And they always said, kleine Kinder, kleine Sodas, große Kinder, große
Right,
Sodas.
yes, I
I don't know
forgot
if I'm
that
saying
one.
it right.
Oh,
right?
yeah, you said it perfectly. That's so true, which means young
Yes.
children, small problems. Older children, larger problems. So, you know, like when you have your new baby, you just can't figure out. You think like, oh my God, I have to feed them and change them and burp them and get up for them at night. And you think like you have your hands full and life can't get more difficult. My grandmother always say, kleine Kinder, kleine Zerriss, große Kinder, große Zerriss. Oh, on this subject, she would always say, the kleine Kinder lassen nicht schlafen, the little children don't let you sleep, and the große Kinder lassen nicht einschlafen, and the older kids don't let you fall asleep.
How do you say in Yiddish? Because so my grandma always said, if I put my dirty laundry out to dry, I look at my neighbors and go, I'll put mine back in. There was something.
So I don't know how to say that in
Okay.
in Yiddish, but I know this idea. They tell this story. I don't know exactly to who it's attributed, but something like if everybody were to put their problems, if they were to put it, you know, into a little, like knot it into a little package and put it on the table and see everybody else's problems, they would take their package back.
back.
So I think it's kind of the same idea.
Thank you. It's wonderful.
Davidson, Morty Berkovich, Montreal, Canada. I
Hi.
really, really enjoyed you so much. It
Well,
brought
thank
back a
you.
tremendous amount of memories. I never had a Bubba. As a matter of fact, I'm named after my Bubba. Her name was Malka, and I'm Melech. But my mother used to use an expression that I remember, is that I don't know the Yiddish translation, but don't throw away bread and look for crumbs.
Good advice.
Yes, my
you.
father gave me the best thing that I could remember as well. Says, Melech, if you don't tell a lie, you never have to worry about any word you say. Thank you so much. I
Oh, you're
really
welcome.
appreciate it.
I grew up with that too, that if you don't tell a lie, you won't have to remember the lie.
Right, that's right, yes.
If you tell a lie, you'll have to remember what iteration of which lie you told.
That's why he said that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Penny, yes.
I can't see you and me, whatever. I don't know where you went. Okay, these two, my mother spoke Yiddish beautifully. She grew up in the Bronx, and Yiddish, I believe was her first language, but she graduated from, whatever. Anyway, she used to say when we were little and we would say we're bored and we don't have anything to do, she would say rinse and van. I think it means go knock your head against the wall or something like that.
Retzedevant, which means talk to the wall.
Talk to the wall.
The other, or clap the cup, clap cup and vant.
Right.
Bang your head against the wall. Yeah.
And the other one, she would always say, Tutmanish Kanchinik.
Hakmanish Kanchinik.
Kanchinik.
Yeah.
And a Groise, no wait.
Größe Knacke?
Oh, just a second. Ab jedem Tuchas agit te schmeißen.
That's a great one. It means when somebody else is behind, it's a great slapping, you know. It's like kind of when you don't have to take the heat, then you're a big knocker. Somebody said a greise knocker. It means like, oh, you know
Yes,
how to
big
make a
shot.
lot of noise. Big shot.
Big shot.
Henny Weiss wanted to say something.
Yes, can
Thank
you hear
so
me?
much. Yes, we hear you.
Okay, good. When I was a kid, and we drove on a car and we passed on the highway, somebody changing a tire, which means they had a flat. My mother would always say, "Nashtugedacht." Years later, when I was first driving and I got a flat, I had to change it myself. I was on the highway. It was a difficult job. I came home dirty, tired. Mother said, "Where were you? What happened?" I said, "I had an Nashtugedacht." And she cried because I
That's
thought
great.
Nashtugedacht meant flat tire. Can you,
Well,
what it really means?
let me just say, if you have to have something that's nicht gedacht, it should only be a flat tire, nothing worse.
Oh,
So, nicht heimgedacht, nicht heimgedacht means it shouldn't happen today. Nicht auf mir gedacht means it shouldn't happen to me. So it's something that people used to say in Yiddish to ward off, you know, anything negative. It shouldn't happen to me. It shouldn't happen today. It shouldn't happen to us. Nicht auf uns gedacht, meaning it shouldn't come on us. So I'm really happy that the nicht gedacht that you had was a flat tire.
thank
And
you.
God should
Thank you.
watch
That
you
helps.
and all of us from any other worse
And
nicht
for
gedacht.
you too, I appreciate you so
Amen.
much.
Amen.
Thank you. Okay.
Any more Sprichwörter that people have to share?
Yes, I remember my grandparents, when I used to sleep over there and usually spend Shabbos there and walk with my grandfather to shul. The things I remember, Geischlafen was,
Yeah.
that was a regular,
Go to sleep.
right? And with shots of liquor, I don't know, with the Slivovitz or something, they had something they said before they had a shot of Slivovitz. But and she used to do something when she had I don't know what the phrase was, but it was something in Yiddish when she put the different fish in the bathtub before making chopped liver, or not chopped liver, but gefilte fish. There was some kind of Yiddish phrase, but they would always talk Yiddish when they didn't want us to understand. I mean,
Yep.
my parents did the same thing. So in my office, I had something called magnetic poetry, and it was a board, and you could put any language on it. And I got the set with 300 Yiddish words, and I would just put some Yiddish words on it. Most of my clients were African American and didn't speak Yiddish, and they were not Jewish, but my mother-in-law was very, very good. She used to go to Yiddish club when she was in her 80s before she passed away. And she came in one day and put on my board in Yiddish, "You can't dance at 2 weddings with 1 tux."
And
that was
that
they really enjoyed.
Yeah, yeah.
And,
Thank you, Sheldon, for sharing that. I remember.
I didn't know that
Oh.
bagel was a Yiddish word as well. And my secretary gave me, when she left, her father was a Lutheran minister, and I still have it. I'm looking at it now. She gave me the hard copy of Louis Rostan's The Joys of Yiddish. And that is like, and many Yiddish words are now part of a regular dictionary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Schmutz and a few others, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you for the presentation.
You brought back a memory. I remember going as a child with my grandfather to the diamond industry on 47th Street. There was a club where there was a kosher restaurant on the top floor, and the elevator operator was an African-American young man who spoke a perfect Yiddish. Perfect Yiddish. He was able to speak with everybody in the elevator. Rochelle Reifman had her hand up.
Oh,
Rochelle.
hi. Thank you so much. This was absolutely delightful. I'm actually a Canadian by birth. I went to Perth Shul. I studied Yiddish. Hebrew high school. We always had Yiddish. My grandparents spoke Yiddish in the home to us, and it's just delightful. To this day, I actually, been reading poetry in Yiddish, and the Yiddish Book Center in Amherst is actually a wonderful resource for all of that. And I just want to thank you so much for everything you said today. It brought back so many memories.
Do you have any expressions that you remember that I didn't
Well,
hit on?
there's only one that my girlfriends and I say, but we probably shouldn't use it in public. So
Oh, now we all
didn't
want to
understand
hear.
until we got older.
Now we all want to hear.
Seriously?
Well, we'll
Yeah.
kick the rabbi off and then you can speak.
Okay, the rabbi has to go off and then I'll say it. But it's so funny. It's so-
Rabbi's off.
Okay.
That's his wife.
It's so funny. And like I said, I didn't really understand it until I got older. But anyway, okay.
Oh,
So
I have a
just-
feeling I know which one. Yeah.
Okay, so it says,
Go ahead.
"When the Dutch state like the Zin and the Dreard," and I always laughed at that because I thought, now I do because I'm thinking, you know what? There's
It may come in a
something to
separate
be
mail
said about
delivery. It may not come that way.
So I never heard that from my grandmother. But
Not
many
from
years
the
later in
grandmother.
Binghamton, I heard a different iteration from my friend Elaine. She said, "When the Schmeckel gate, when the Schmeckel state, the Seichel gate."
Perfect.
She
That's
taught
just
me
like that's absolutely very similar.
Yeah.
But
I feel like somebody else was raising their hand.
Sure,
Sharon,
thank you.
maybe?
Yes. I was raised, my grandparents didn't live in Arizona where we were, but my parents both spoke Yiddish quite a bit. Of course, we were never supposed to understand what they were saying. And like Sheldon, my uncle, when I was about 25 years old, handed me The Joy of Yiddish by Leo Roston. But one thing I remember so vividly, my father used to say, you never should insult somebody directly. You always, and he had all these different Yiddish expressions that were enough to get the point across, but never hurt somebody's feelings. And my favorite one, and I can't remember the whole thing in Yiddish, but you'll be able to finish it for me. My favorite was, Wer wachs und Sibylla, you should grow like an onion with your head in the ground and your feet in the air. And I don't know the rest of it.
I don't know if anybody knows the rest of it. Please chime in. I never heard that one.
You never heard that? Oh,
Oh, sorry.
he said never insult somebody.
It's Sybil mit dem Koppen dererd.
That's it.
Was wird Sybil mit dem Koppen dererd?
Via cup and head, it's like the head in the
Correct.
head in the earth. Another one that I just remembered was my grandmother would say, "Se geht dir on wie verjährige Schnee," which means she cares about it like last year's snow. So when she would say something to somebody and she would see that they don't really care, she would say, "Se geht dir on verjährige Schnee," like last year's.
Well, I just want to say thank you because this has been so delightful in a walk down memory lane. I only know a few Yiddish words. I can probably get by with. I understand much of what you're saying, but I'm finding I put as much Yiddish in the conversations with my grandsons as I possibly can because I really want them to know what it's about. And our line at night was always Schlafgesundheit. And to
Yep.
this day, and to this
Schlafgesundheit.
day, my daughter says it to her children and so
Oh,
on.
that's nice. That's really nice.
Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, my pleasure. Anybody else?
Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah, we hear you,
see
Rhoda.
and
Okay.
hear you.
Okay. My grandparents lived in Philadelphia and my parents had moved to Chicago before I was born. When my mother's mother passed away, her father came to Chicago to live with us because the only one of his children that kept kosher was my mother. So then that's where the Yiddish came in because whenever, like this other lady had said, they didn't want us to know something, they would speak in Yiddish. So we would learn it, but never could speak it. And in 1973, just before my mom really got passed away, we went out to visit them in California and she wanted us to go New Year's Eve to see Mickey Katz. And never would babysit, but for that, she says she's going to sit, she wants us to go. My husband did not know one word of Yiddish. And I was there all night trying to listen to Mickey Katz and translate to him before the next line was said. Unfortunately, from 73 until now, I've lost so much of it. And I keep looking for a place to learn conversational Yiddish.
Well, hopefully you'll find it because it's a wonderful language.
I agree. We enjoyed, they didn't know for a long time that we understood them. Eventually they figured it out. Yeah.
I love
Myra-
the fact.
Oh, go for it, Judy.
Excuse me, I love the fact that so much Yiddish has been incorporated in our language now. I know from time to time, a Gentile person and I will be talking, and they don't realize that it's a Yiddish expression like schlep or
Chutzpah,
chutzpah,
which is Hebrew, actually.
to kibbutz is another one. The ones that I remember from home is like Michigas, Abyssal, Yiddish Kop, maybe you mentioned that already. And Upgus is another one. And I think that my family made a bad expression nicer when we were children. Because they used to say alta kuta for an old person. And that we're all alta kakas. I think that, did anyone else hear the expression alta kuta?
Akakaka, I did.
Yeah, so that's what
What
they
does that mean?
did. And it means cat, an old cat. But that was it.
Okay. I was just wondering, yeah.
Yeah. But a
Well,
lot
I
of
would-
little
oh, I-
ones like new hidzach, feh, just things like that. It's brings back a lot of memories. Unfortunately, I didn't know whole sentences, but it was still a very, very rich and colorful, fun thing to do, to have this other language.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing. I wanted to say I work in a preschool in the public school, and 4-year-old, and she says to me last year, I got to go pish. My girlfriend that I work with, it's not Jewish. She's like, what in the world is she trying to say? So I had to explain that to her. And she's like, oh, I never heard that before. And then I told her mother that she's saying that to me. She's got to go push. And she stopped doing that, which is a shame. I thought it was cute. But then she started saying, I need to use the restroom. Yeah, it was cute.
What is the difference between a schlump and a schlamazel?
Or a schlemiel.
Is that what it is? A schlump is a
Schlemiel,
man?
schlemazel.
There's the classic line. There's the classic line. One of them spills the soup and the other one has the soup spilled on them.
Okay.
I see that, Myra, you wanted to say something, but you're muted, I think. Oh, now you're unmuted.
Yeah,
Myra.
I'll say what I wanted to say, and that is, my father had, let him rest in peace, he had a store on Maxwell Street in Chicago, and he used to sell what they call dry goods. And if he saw a customer really didn't want to buy something, he would, like chenille spread, he would take it and rub it on her, and the chenille would come off on her or him and say, lady, this is genuine schmati. Schmati is a rag.
Did anyone ever hear the expressions the taig of kaparas?
Yeah.
Ever hear that? Which means it's good for kaparas. Kaparas is the custom of taking a chicken and slaughtering it before Yom Kippur.
Yeah.
Exactly, like you just did. Yeah.
Yeah.
So taig of kaparas would be code for this is junk. Like you said, a shmata.
Sharon, you wanted to say something again?
Yeah, I wanted to share something with all of you. My grandson, like everybody else, completed his junior year in high school. And his teacher was leaving to go on to move out of the state. And he left his class with one statement. He said, all I wish for you is that you should all grow up and become a mensch. And he wasn't Jewish. And he looked at the class, and because they were on Zoom, of course, and said, does anybody even know what that means? And I'm so thrilled my grandson raised his hand and he answered it. And at least he's 17, he got one word and he remembered it.
Oh, that's a good word to remember.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for sharing that. Yeah, Myra.
Information. Colin Powell was a Shabbos Goy. A Shabbos Goy is somebody who turns on the lights and turns off the lights for people. He redt Yiddish. He speaks Yiddish sehr gut. Is better than I do. Better than I do.
Really? Wow.
Well, I don't know if it was Colin Powell. There is something going around of someone in government, but
It was Colin Powell.
Colin Powell.
And the other person was Al Gore. Al Gore at the that year that Joe Lieberman was running for vice president at the Democratic National Convention. He was introduced by Al Gore, and Al Gore said, "I am proud to tell you that I was Joe's Shabbos guy." Only in America.
My wife has a cousin whose father was a rabbi in Memphis, and on his downstairs, he lived on the top floor, and downstairs below him was Elvis Presley, and Elvis Presley was his Shabbos guy, and he kept in touch with him his whole life.
Sheldon, who was that rabbi, Sheldon? I'm from Memphis.
I don't know the rabbi. The family in Baltimore, I don't know what her maiden name was. It was a cousin of my wife. Her husband was a first cousin, but he lived on the second floor. He had a small, I think it was a small Orthodox congregation, but I don't remember the name of the congregation or the rabbi's name. I mean, I know the husband's name, but she was married. They got married and she moved to Baltimore. But that was their Shabbos goy, and was Elvis Presley to do everything. And they gave him some shekels and he was happy. That's before he became famous.
Yeah, I would imagine.
If Elvis Presley is your Shabbos guy, that's what you call yichus.
Yeah.
I have a different joke entirely. People were on Ellis Island, or coming, to America, and the official asks this Jewish man, "What is your name?" And he says, "Oi, Sean Ferguson." "Okay, Sean Ferguson." Sean Ferguson means I already forgot. That goes through.
Good one, Myra.
Sean Ferguson. And there's another man there, and he's Asian. And the official says to him, "What's his name? What is your name?" But he says it in English. And the Asian says, "Me too." "Okay, Sean Ferguson." The Asian's name was Me Too. A lot of people get their names.
When my grandfather, am I allowed to speak?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, when my grandfather came through Ellis Island, my maiden name is Smith. And everybody used to tease me, that's not a very Jewish name. And when I found out many years later, when my grandfather came through Ellis Island, they said, "What are you?" And he really didn't speak English, of course. And he was a blacksmith in Russia. He was a smith. And that's how we got the name Smith.
Oh.
Nice.
Yep.
A lot of those.
Anyone else have anything to share?
I do. Of course.
Myra, you have no lack of
Of course,
sharing.
Myra, you do, Myra.
Yeah.
Myra. I didn't hear what you said.
Is it a joke?
Sean Ferguson. No, it's not. It's just little information. My maiden name is Wallachin. And recently I found out that there was a yeshiva in Russia called Volushin. Now, that's where my parents came from, my father at any rate, but my mother too, because she was a cousin to my father. That's where I get my chutzpah, my I'm a first generation. I'm okay. Never mind.
Aw.
Anyone else have anything to share? If not,
I
you
do
can
have
take-
a
sure, go
sorry.
for it, Rochelle.
Sorry, I was just going to say one last thing. I'm just remembering as we were talking, and I remember sitting in school and we were practicing our Buchstaben, our letters. And I remember the teacher would say to us, she would say, we'd all look up because like, we're so tired of doing it. And she'd say, nope. She said, a bissel and a bissel, wird a full schissel. And I used to think that is absolutely perfect. It always made sense.
Nice.
Sorry,
And-
did I leave? I'm sorry, pardon me. I had a call coming through. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. Does anyone
Thank
else
you.
have any, I think that we'll have to do, Marcia, do you have a question or? No, okay, good. I just see your hand, so. If you have a Yiddish joke, that'll have to be for the next one. But if not, I'd just like to thank my Schwieger, as she so eloquently translated for everyone what that translates to. Although someone mentioned that I had already used that word earlier. For coming on today and sharing all these beautiful phrases and things to live by or to not live by, as she said. And I just want to mention that this coming Wednesday, we do have an author. Her name is Ruth Rotkowitz. She is a second generation Holocaust survivor, meaning her parents were Holocaust survivors, and she grew up within that, as she phrases it, trauma. And that's what her book's premise is. It's really about the trauma as children growing up as children of Holocaust because of their parents' feelings and how they raised them, with the scares and feelings and just everything that was involved with that. So that is, her book is Escaping the Whale. That's going to be on Wednesday at 12:30. This coming Friday will not be Seventh House Strings. They're going to be in 2 weeks. So Friday is going to be a presentation by a woman. Her name is Lauren Friedman. It's called RX Matters. So it's all about drugs, but specifically prescription medicine. And then, of course, if you haven't seen this, there will be an email going out today, June 21st. We have a presentation called Jewish Daughter of Hamas. That is at 6:30. That is on Sunday. And June 23rd, we have a special presentation, One People, One Heart. That is for the Rebbe, for his yard site. That's going to be a Tuesday evening at 7:30. So again, those are just presentations. They'll be in the upcoming emails, but I just want to make sure you are aware of that. And again, thank you everyone for joining today. If you'd like to schmooze, I'll be on. But again, thank you very much to my Schwieger, to Mrs. Slonim. Thank
Great
you.
to see you all. All the best.
Thank you.
Seid
Very good.
gesund und
Enjoyed it.
stark, everybody. Seid gesund und stark.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have to just say, I didn't have the rich Yiddish background that you did, nor the rich family that you were able to grow up in. And it was just delightful to hear your story and your stories. So thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. Have a good day.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.